The wind howled through the darkness, a relentless force that never stopped. It screamed through the jagged peaks of the Ural Mountains, carrying with it a chill that bit through even the thickest layers of fur and wool. Inside the tent, 9 hikers huddled close, their bodies pressed together for warmth, their breath visible in the dim glow of a flickering lantern. The storm outside was fierce, but that wasn't what unsettled them. There was something else, something unseen. Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, exhaled slowly, his breath curling into the frozen air. His hands were stiff from the cold, but the sensation barely registered. He was listening, his heartbeat pounding in his ears, drowning out the sound of the storm. The others felt it too. A tension had settled over the camp, a gnawing sense that something was wrong. It was a feeling none of them could explain, but none of them could ignore. Then came the sound, faint, almost lost beneath the howling wind. A distant crack, sharp and unnatural, carried through the night. Someone shifted uneasily. It was probably nothing, a shifting mass of snow, a tree branch snapping in the wind. And yet, it didn't feel like nothing. No one spoke, no one laughed. The usual lightheartedness that had carried them through their long journey was gone. There was only silence, and something else lurking at the edges of their awareness. Then, suddenly, everything changed. Somewhere between night and morning, panic ripped through the tent. No one knows exactly what happened in those final moments, but what we do know is chilling. The hikers, young and experienced, did something no mountaineer should ever do in a blizzard. They cut open their own tent from the inside and fled into the snow. They left behind their boots, their jackets, their supplies, running blindly into the darkness, into the freezing night, as if something inside that tent was far more terrifying than the cold. But what were they running from? Hours passed, then days, then weeks. When the search teams arrived, they were met with a scene that made no sense. The tent was still there, half buried in snow, its contents eerily untouched. The footprints leading away were erratic, confused, but there were no signs of an external threat. Then they found the bodies. The first 2 were found beneath a cedar tree, their bodies half naked, their hands raw and bloody, as if they had tried to climb in a desperate attempt to escape something. 3 more were discovered lying in the open snow, frozen in place, their expressions twisted in terror. It took months to find the last 4, buried beneath several feet of ice in a nearby ravine. And that's when things became even stranger. Some of the hikers had suffered catastrophic internal injuries, their bones shattered with the force of a high-speed car crash, but with no external wounds. One woman was found missing her tongue and eyes, as if something had removed them with surgical precision. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints from an attacker, no indication of what could have caused such injuries. It was as if something unseen had struck them down. The official Soviet investigation was closed quickly, the cause of death listed as a compelling natural force. But those words only raised more questions than they answered. Was it an avalanche? A sudden weather event? A secret military experiment gone wrong? Or was it something else? More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most chilling and unexplained mysteries in modern history. Even today, new theories emerge, each one more terrifying than the last. Some believe the hikers witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Others think they encountered a force beyond human understanding, something lurking in the frozen abyss of the Urals. The truth remains buried beneath the snow, waiting, watching, and perhaps it is still there. Imagine it. You are running through waist-deep snow, your breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold is no longer something you feel. It has become something inside you, stealing the warmth from your bones, numbing you to everything but fear. Your feet are bare, your body only half clothed, but you do not stop. You do not think. There is only the instinct to run. But from what? The darkness swirls around you, the storm blinding, suffocating. Somewhere behind you, the others are falling. You do not look back. You cannot look back. A figure collapses in the snow. Another stumbles forward, their hands reaching for something unseen. The forest looms ahead, an endless wall of trees, their skeletal branches reaching like twisted fingers into the night. And then, suddenly, there is silence. No footsteps, no screaming, just the wind, and whatever waits within the trees. The search teams arrived weeks later, expecting to find the hikers dead from exposure. They had no idea what they were about to uncover. The tent was still standing, partially buried beneath layers of ice and snow. The fabric was cut open from the inside, as if the hikers had sliced their way out in sheer terror. Their belongings remained untouched. Food, clothes, supplies, all left behind as if none of it mattered. The bodies, when they were eventually found, told a story that should not have been possible. Some were frozen solid, their expressions twisted in agony. Others had suffered invisible trauma, their ribs and skulls shattered from within, as if crushed by something with no visible force. And then there was Ludmila Dubinina. Her eyes were missing, her tongue was gone, not eaten, not torn, simply removed. What does that? What leaves no footprints, no signs of a struggle, and yet kills with such precise, inhuman force? Some claimed it was an avalanche, but the tent was never buried. Others suggested it was a sudden weather phenomenon, but that would not explain the broken bones, the missing body parts, or the radiation found on some of the victims' clothing. Whatever happened in Dyatlov Pass was not normal. It was something else. Decades later, scientists, historians, and conspiracy theorists still cannot agree on what happened. Some believe the hikers were victims of a Soviet military test gone horribly wrong. Others claim they were attacked by something that lurks in the mountains, something that should not exist. And then, there are those who say it was something worse. That the mountain itself is alive, that it watches, that it waits. Whatever the truth may be, the 9 young hikers who set out into the Ural Mountains in 1959 never came back, and whatever took them was never found. The journey began like so many before it. Excited chatter, shared stories, the rhythmic crunch of boots against the frozen ground. For them, this was not just another hike. It was a test of skill, endurance, and the raw spirit of adventure. Each of them had trained for years to reach this level of experience, young but hardened by the cold, the mountain air, and the vast emptiness of the wilderness. They trusted each other with their lives, bound together by a determination that few could understand. Igor Dyatlov was their leader, a 23-year-old engineering student whose meticulous planning had shaped every detail of this expedition. He was disciplined, methodical, a man who knew how to command respect without demanding it. The group looked to him for guidance, knowing that if anything went wrong, Igor would be the one to find a solution. But no amount of planning could have prepared him for what lay ahead. Among the hikers was Zenaida Kolmogorova, as fearless as she was independent. She had a sharp mind and a sharp tongue to match, always ready to challenge the men around her. Her friendship with Igor had grown over years of shared expeditions, their bond one of mutual admiration and unspoken trust. Then there was Yuri Doroshenko, known for his unshakable courage. Once, on a previous expedition, he had faced down a bear with nothing but a geologist hammer. His fearlessness was legendary among their peers, but the mountains did not care for legends. Rustem Slobodin was quieter, more introspective, a long-distance runner whose endurance seemed limitless. He rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. a trait that made his words carry more weight when he did. Nikolai Thibault Brignol was the intellectual of the group, a man with an analytical mind that often saw patterns others missed. His French heritage gave him a distinct presence among the others, though his loyalty to his homeland was unquestioned. Alexander Kolevatov was a mystery even to those closest to him. Reserved and methodical, he had ties to Soviet nuclear research, ties that some would later claim had something to do with what happened on that mountain. Then there was Semyon Zolotaryov, the only one among them who was not a student. A 38-year-old military veteran, his presence was unusual, his background raising silent questions. He had survived war, seen things the others could never imagine, yet something about this journey had drawn him in. Ludmila Dubinina was the youngest, just 20 years old, but she had a spirit that made her stand out. She was strong-willed, fiercely independent, unwilling to back down from a challenge. It was that same resilience that made her death all the more horrifying. Yuri Krivonishenko was the light-hearted one, the joker, always carrying his mandolin to lift their spirits when exhaustion set in. He had a way of making the others laugh even in the harshest conditions, his energy contagious. The wind never stops in Dyatlov Pass. It howls across the frozen landscape, carving its way through the jagged peaks, a constant reminder that this place belongs to the elements, not to those who dare trespass upon it. The land is vast and merciless, stretching endlessly into white oblivion, swallowing all sound, all warmth, all certainty. And somewhere beneath that endless expanse of snow and ice, the truth remains buried, frozen in time just like the bodies that were found there so many years ago. There is something unsettling about a mystery that refuses to be solved. In most cases, time brings clarity, new evidence, new discoveries, confessions, scientific breakthroughs, but not here, not with this. The Dyatlov Pass Incident is different. The more one searches for answers, the more questions emerge, unraveling any sense of closure. Theories rise and fall, explanations are given and dismissed, but none of them fit every detail. Something still lingers in the silence of those mountains, something unresolved, something unspeakable. Perhaps that is what makes this story so terrifying. The idea that 9 experienced hikers, well-trained, prepared for anything nature could throw at them, could be reduced to panic and despair so quickly, so completely. They should have survived. They should have fought against the cold, made their way back to the tent, found shelter. But they didn't. Something drove them out into the night. Something made them abandon reason, abandon logic, abandon survival itself. And the most horrifying thought of all, whatever it was, it did not leave behind a single trace of itself. There were no foreign footprints in the snow, no blood trails, no weapons, no signs of attack. The only evidence was the destruction it left in its wake, bodies twisted in impossible ways, skulls shattered, ribs crushed, eyes and tongues missing, as if taken by something with a purpose beyond human understanding. Even the investigators, hardened by their experience with death, were left shaken by what they saw. One of them later admitted that he could never forget the look on the faces of the dead, frozen in expressions of terror so absolute that even the ice could not erase it. But perhaps the most chilling realization is that we may never know the truth. The Soviet Union buried the case quickly, locking away files, silencing those who asked too many questions. Decades later, even as the documents have been declassified, the answers remain elusive. The official explanation, a desperate attempt to put the mystery to rest, does not hold up under scrutiny. The surviving evidence suggests something far stranger, something that cannot be easily explained away. Maybe it was a weapon, an experiment gone wrong, a test of something beyond what we were meant to understand. Maybe it was something ancient, something that had been waiting in the mountains long before humans ever set foot there. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something that cannot be categorized, something that does not fit into the limited scope of what we believe reality to be. What we do know is this: those 9 hikers never came home. Their families were left with questions that would never be answered, their final moments reduced to speculation, their terror immortalized in frozen bodies and slashed open tents. Their story is now legend, whispered among those who study the unexplained, a reminder that some places in this world do not abide by the rules we understand. And the mountain remains the same. It does not care for the lives that were lost upon it, does not mourn those who vanished into its depths. It watches, it waits, it endures, indifferent to the fear it has inspired. Those who step into its shadow today do so with the knowledge that they are walking in the footsteps of the doomed. Because some places are not meant for us. Some places take more than they give. Some places do not forget. And when the wind howls through Dyatlov Pass, it is impossible not to wonder if it carries with it the echoes of those final screams, lost in the night, never to be heard again. The final footsteps of the Dyatlov group are long since erased by time, their presence reduced to scattered remnants of evidence and unanswered questions. But the mountain does not forget. It holds on to its secrets, buried beneath the ice, waiting for those who still dare to search for the truth. The story of that night, whatever truly happened, is more than just a mystery. It is a warning, a whispered caution to those who think they can conquer something that was never meant to be conquered. And then there are the whispers, stories of modern hikers who have returned from Dyatlov Pass with their own tales of unease. Some report feelings of being watched, an unnatural silence that settles over the land as if something unseen is still lurking there. Others claim to have seen strange lights in the sky, just as the original hikers did in their final days. It raises the question, could it happen again? Some believe it already has. In 2019, 60 years after the Dyatlov Pass Incident, another group of tourists ventured into the Ural Mountains, drawn by the mystery. One of them, Alexander Bortnikov, was later found dead under circumstances that bore an eerie resemblance to the 1959 case. His body was discovered in the snow with no clear cause of death, his tent left behind, torn open from the inside. The authorities quickly dismissed it as hypothermia, just as they had done decades before. But those who know the story understand that the mountain does not forget. Whatever happened to the Dyatlov group remains frozen in time, waiting for those who dare to search for the truth. And for some, the truth may be more terrifying than the mystery itself. There is something deeply unsettling about the idea that whatever happened on that mountain could happen again. The Dyatlov Pass Incident is not just a tragedy of the past. It is a lingering shadow that continues to stretch across the decades, casting doubt on every official explanation and leaving behind an eerie sense that it was not an isolated event. The more one examines the case, the more it becomes clear that the mountains of the Urals hold secrets that may never be fully uncovered. Even today, seasoned hikers and researchers who visit the pass report experiences that are difficult to explain. Some have described an overwhelming sensation of being watched, a feeling that settles in as soon as they reach the area where the Dyatlov group met their fate. Others speak of the unnatural stillness, an absence of animal life, as if the land itself remembers what happened and warns away those who do not belong. And then, there are the accounts of sudden, inexplicable fear, a feeling of absolute terror that grips travelers without warning, urging them to leave before it's too late. Many dismiss these experiences as the effects of an overactive imagination, the product of minds that have been primed by the dark history of the place. But there are other stories, ones that are harder to explain. Strange lights still appear in the skies over the pass, glowing orbs moving in patterns that no aircraft should follow. Compasses fail without warning. Radio signals vanish. In some cases, modern hikers have gone missing, only to turn up miles away with no memory of how they got there. The 1959 case may be the most famous, but it is not the only one. Other disappearances have been reported in the Urals, cases that share eerie similarities with Dyatlov. There are accounts of hikers vanishing under mysterious circumstances, of bodies found in positions that suggest sudden and overwhelming terror. Some of these cases were never fully investigated, buried under the same vague explanations of exposure and natural causes, but the patterns remain, whispering of something more. If it were just the Dyatlov group, perhaps there would be a way to rationalize it, but when the same elements appear in cases decades apart, panic, missing time, catastrophic internal injuries with no external cause, it becomes impossible to ignore the question that lurks beneath it all. Is there something in those mountains that we do not understand? Some believe that whatever happened in Dyatlov Pass was a singular, tragic event, something that will never be repeated. But others are not so sure. The official 2019 reinvestigation of the case concluded that an avalanche was to blame, a theory that had already been widely dismissed by those who had studied the details. It was an answer given not to satisfy curiosity, but to put the case to rest once and for all. But some mysteries refuse to die. As long as people continue to disappear in the wilderness without explanation, as long as strange lights continue to appear in the skies above the Urals, the questions will remain. What happened to the Dyatlov group was not just a freak accident, it was something else, something that defies simple categorization. It was a glimpse into the unknown, a moment when reality itself seemed to fracture, leaving behind evidence that does not fit within the framework of what we understand. Perhaps the most chilling thought is this: the mountain has already taken before. It is taken after, and it may not be finished. In the weeks leading up to the disaster, multiple reports surfaced from villages and military personnel in the region about strange glowing orbs in the sky. These lights were seen moving erratically, pulsing and shifting in ways that defied any known aircraft. The hikers themselves had reportedly seen them too. Their final photographs included eerie, blurred images of glowing objects in the darkness. Had they encountered something beyond human comprehension? Had they been pursued by something from above? The UFO theory gained traction when researchers noticed similarities between the Dyatlov case and other alleged alien encounters. The injuries suffered by the hikers resembled accounts from other so-called abduction cases, where victims were reportedly subjected to high-energy radiation exposure and sudden violent trauma. The missing eyes and tongue were disturbingly similar to cases of cattle mutilation, a phenomenon often linked to extraterrestrial activity. Could it be possible that the hikers had witnessed something in the sky that night, something they were never meant to see? Were they targeted, caught in the path of an unknown force that erased them in the most terrifying way possible? But there was still another theory, one that many dismissed as folklore, but could not be ignored. The Yetis of the Urals were a long-standing myth in Russian legend. Stories of massive humanoid creatures covered in white fur stalking the remote mountains had been passed down for generations. Some believed that the hikers had come face to face with one of these creatures, a predator so powerful that it could crush human bones with ease. This theory, wild as it seemed, had one eerie piece of supporting evidence: one of the hikers' final diary entries, written in a strangely ominous tone. "We now know that snowmen exist. Was it a joke, a reference to something else, or was it a cryptic warning? Over the years, others would go missing in the Dyatlov Pass region. Some never returned. Others spoke of a deep and unnatural fear, an overwhelming sensation of being watched. To this day, no single theory can explain everything that happened that night. The injuries, the missing organs, the radiation, the panic, it all paints a picture of something unprecedented, something terrifyingly unknown. The truth remains buried in the snow, frozen in time, waiting for those who dare to seek it. But some say the mountain still holds its secrets, and that whatever took the Dyatlov group is still watching. The Dyatlov Pass Incident refuses to be forgotten. Decades later, it continues to haunt investigators, researchers, and anyone who dares to dig too deep into its chilling details. The story has spread far beyond the borders of Russia, making its way into books, documentaries, and films that attempt to piece together the impossible puzzle. Yet, for all the attention it has received, no one has been able to provide an answer that satisfies every piece of evidence. Instead, the legend has grown, mutating into something more than just a cold case. It has become a story of the unknown, a cautionary tale about the limits of human understanding. Its influence can be seen across pop culture, seeping into the worlds of horror, conspiracy theories, and science fiction. Filmmakers have taken inspiration from its eerie details, using the story as a foundation for movies like Devil's Pass, a found-footage horror film that reimagines the case with a supernatural twist. Documentaries have attempted to separate fact from fiction, analyzing the available evidence while uncovering inconsistencies in the official reports. Even video games have drawn from the story, incorporating the sense of isolation and terror that the hikers must have felt in their final moments. But perhaps what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so compelling is that it does not need embellishment to be terrifying. The truth, whatever it may be, is already unsettling enough. The idea that 9 experienced hikers could be driven into a state of pure, mindless panic without a single survivor to explain why is a fear more real than any monster conjured in fiction. The most enduring aspect of the case, however, is the way it has embedded itself in the minds of those who hear it. Everyone who learns about Dyatlov Pass is left with the same set of questions, turning the details over and over in their heads, searching for an explanation that does not exist. The horror lies in the lack of closure. The official reports remain vague. The evidence does not add up. Theories clash, none of them able to fully explain every chilling detail. And then there are the ones who whisper of something else, something even darker. The Dyatlov group had joked in their final days about snowmen watching them, an eerie note found in their last diary entries. Was it just a playful reference, or had they seen something lurking in the distance, something they could not explain? Whatever happened that night, the truth was buried in snow and silence. No footprints but their own, no evidence but their shattered bodies. And the mountain remained indifferent. The case was officially closed, the files locked away, but the questions never faded. The families of the victims were left without answers, their loved ones' final moments forever lost to the cold. The pass where they perished was renamed Dyatlov Pass, a place forever marked by the unspeakable terror of that night. Over the years, more hikers would disappear in those mountains. Some vanished without a trace. Others returned, speaking of a deep and inexplicable fear, a sense of being watched by something unseen. The Ural Mountains keep their secrets well, and whatever took those 9 hikers may still be waiting. Theories began to circulate before the bodies were even brought down from the mountain. The official reports left too many unanswered questions, and the more investigators examined the evidence, the less sense it all made. There was no sign of a struggle, yet the hikers had fled, as if something had sent them into a blind panic. The injuries, the missing eyes and tongue, the radiation, all of it pointed to something beyond a simple case of exposure or an avalanche. And yet, the Soviet authorities insisted on their vague conclusion, a compelling natural force. But what kind of force? One of the first theories to emerge was that the hikers had been caught in an avalanche, a natural disaster that would have sent them running for their lives. It seemed plausible at first. After all, they had camped on an exposed slope. If a sudden shift in the snow had threatened to bury them, they might have panicked, cutting open their tent in desperation and running downhill in an attempt to escape the crushing weight of snow. But that theory quickly fell apart under closer scrutiny. The tent had been found still partially standing, and the area showed no clear signs of an avalanche having occurred. The patterns of snowdrift and terrain did not support the idea that an avalanche had struck at all. And then there were the injuries, brutal internal trauma, broken bones, crushed ribs, yet no external wounds. An avalanche would have tossed them violently, yet some of them had no injuries at all, beyond hypothermia. The evidence didn't fit. If nature wasn't to blame, then perhaps something, or someone, was. Some suspected that the group had stumbled into a Soviet military experiment. The Ural Mountains were no stranger to secrecy, and the Cold War had bred a climate of classified tests and experimental weapons. Had the hikers inadvertently entered a restricted area, only to become unintended casualties of a weapons test? The radiation found on their clothing raised further questions. It was not strong enough to suggest direct exposure to a nuclear blast, but it was unnatural in its presence. Some believed the group had been exposed to an experimental radioactive weapon, something designed for battlefield use but never meant for human testing. Others speculated that they had come across something they weren't supposed to see, perhaps a missile test or a secret military operation, and were silenced as a result. The Soviet Union was known for its brutal efficiency in covering up disasters, and if these hikers had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, it wouldn't have been the first time inconvenient witnesses were erased. But even this theory left questions unanswered. If they had been killed to conceal a secret, why leave their bodies scattered across the landscape instead of making them disappear entirely? And what kind of weapon could inflict such severe internal trauma without leaving a single mark on the skin? As the official explanations crumbled, whispers of something more unnatural began to spread. The Mansi people, the indigenous inhabitants of the Ural region, had long believed that the mountain where the hikers perished was a cursed place. Its very name, Kholat Syakhl, translated to Mountain of the Dead in their language. Legends told of spirits that roamed the peaks, ancient beings that did not take kindly to outsiders. Some speculated that the hikers had disturbed something in their climb, something that was never meant to be seen. Then there were the lights. The 10th member of the group was Yuri Yudin, the one who would later call himself the luckiest and the unluckiest man alive. An illness forced him to turn back early in the expedition, sparing him from what would come. In the years that followed, he would struggle with that fact, haunted by the question of what had really happened to his friends. The journey began on January 23, 1959, as they boarded a train that would take them deep into the Ural Mountains. Their final destination was Otorten, a peak whose name in the Mansi language meant, "Don't go there." To them, it was just another challenge, another step in proving their strength against the wilderness. They arrived at the last inhabited village on January 27th, Vijay, where they spent the night with locals, sharing stories and supplies. There was laughter, warmth, the simple joy of being together before stepping into the unknown. They wrote letters home, took photographs, capturing moments they didn't know would be their last. On January 28th, Yuri Yudin fell ill, forced to turn back. It was a painful decision, but at the time, it seemed like nothing more than bad luck. He said his goodbyes, watching his friends disappear into the wilderness, never knowing that he would be the last to see them alive. The group pressed on, their spirits high despite the bitter cold. They documented everything: photographs, journal entries, maps of their route. Even in the harshest conditions, there was joy. They laughed, played in the snow, wrote of their exhaustion and triumphs. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, something shifted. The final entries in their journals spoke of an unease that had begun to settle over them. Strange lights had been seen in the sky, glowing orbs moving in ways that no aircraft should. Some wrote of an unsettling feeling, as if they were being watched. Then there was the final photograph taken on their camera, blurry, indistinct, showing something glowing against the night sky. February 1st was the last day anyone would hear from them. They had planned to reach the summit and then return to a more sheltered area for the night, but for some reason, they set up camp in the open, on an exposed slope, rather than in the protection of the forest below. Some believe it was a mistake, others that they had no choice. That night, something happened. No one knows what it was, but something sent them running, barefoot, into the snow. They slashed open their tent from the inside, a move so desperate it defied logic. They did not stop to grab their coats, their boots, anything that could have saved them from the deadly cold. Some ran together, others split off. Some made it to the tree line. Their bodies later found beneath a cedar, hands raw from trying to climb, as if something had driven them upward in sheer terror. Others were found scattered in the snow, as if they had tried to return to the tent before succumbing to the elements. And then there were the 4 in the ravine, buried deep beneath the ice, their bodies broken in ways that no natural force should have caused. Something had driven them to their deaths, something that left no footprints, something that took their tongues and eyes. The search teams found their remains weeks later, the scene so strange that even hardened investigators could not explain it. There was no evidence of an avalanche, no tracks of an attacker, no signs of struggle. Yet the injuries were impossible to ignore. Ribs shattered, skulls crushed, as if they had been struck with a force beyond human comprehension. The Soviet authorities closed the case quickly. A compelling natural force, they said, but no force of nature explains what happened that night. No rational explanation accounts for the fear that sent them fleeing into the abyss. Decades later, the questions remain. What did they see? What were they running from? And what, if anything, still waits in those mountains, watching, unseen? The search began with uncertainty, a creeping dread that settled over the rescuers as they made their way into the mountains. The hikers were overdue, but that alone was not unusual. Delays were expected in such brutal conditions. At first, no one wanted to believe that something had gone terribly wrong, but as the days passed with no word, no sign of movement from their expected route, that hopeful patience turned into something else, something darker. On February 20th, 1959, search teams were officially dispatched. The first to set out were volunteers, friends, fellow students, and instructors from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, many of whom knew the hikers personally. The military soon followed, bringing aircraft and specialized rescue units. The mountain was vast, indifferent, and utterly silent as they moved through its frozen expanse. It didn't take long to find the first clue. From a distance, the tent looked oddly untouched, partially collapsed, but still standing, its pale canvas barely visible against the snow. As the searchers approached, they expected to find supplies inside, perhaps even the hikers themselves, huddled together, waiting for help. But what they found was far stranger. The tent was empty. Inside, everything was in place. Clothing, food, boots, even their journals and cameras. Nothing had been taken, nothing disturbed. The only sign of something wrong was the way it had been cut open from the inside. This was not a case of an avalanche burying them or the wind tearing the fabric. Someone, or something, inside the tent had slashed through the walls, desperate to escape. Then came the tracks. Bare footprints, scattered and confused, leading away from the tent in multiple directions. Some prints showed socks, others were completely barefoot. Madness in temperatures that could kill a person within an hour. And yet, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints leading to the tent, only away. They followed the tracks down toward the tree line, where the first bodies were found. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko lay beneath a cedar tree, their corpses stiff, half-dressed, their fingers torn apart as if they had tried to climb in a desperate attempt to escape something on the ground. Nearby, the snow had been disturbed, evidence of a small fire they had built in a last effort to keep warm, but the fire had died long before they did. Not far from them, the searchers discovered 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Rustem Slobodin, and Zinaida Kolmogorova. They were scattered across the slope, their bodies frozen mid-motion, as if they had been trying to return to the tent before succumbing to the cold. Slobodin had a fractured skull, but no external wounds, no sign of a fall, no sign of an impact, just broken bone. For weeks, the remaining hikers were nowhere to be found. The search teams combed the landscape, but the mountain refused to give up its dead. It wasn't until May, months after the initial discovery, that the last 4 bodies were uncovered. They were buried deep in a ravine, nearly 15 feet beneath the snow. This is where the mystery deepened. Unlike the others, these bodies were not simply frozen. They were damaged in ways that defied explanation. Ludmila Dubinina's chest had been crushed, her ribs shattered as if struck by an unimaginable force. Her eyes were missing, her tongue was gone. Some would claim scavengers had done it, but her body had been buried beneath snow for months. No animals had disturbed her remains. The injuries were too precise, too clean, too unnatural. Semyon Zolotaryov, the most experienced of them all, had suffered identical injuries. Ribs caved in, bones pulverized from the inside out, yet no external wounds to explain it. This level of trauma was equivalent to a high-speed car crash, yet there were no cliffs, no signs of impact, no fall that could have caused such destruction. Alexander Kolovatov was found close to them, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle, his skull bearing no signs of an external blow. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had the most gruesome fate of them all. His skull was completely crushed, yet his skin remained intact. Something had shattered his head from within. The searchers stood in silence as they processed what they had found. This was no ordinary tragedy. Then came the final discovery. Some of the hikers' clothing contained radiation, not traces from the natural environment, not from something expected in the wilderness, but enough to raise suspicion. The official Soviet investigation concluded quickly, stamping the case as closed with a vague and chilling explanation. The hikers died due to a compelling natural force. No further details were provided. The files were sealed, hidden from the public for decades. But people had already begun asking the questions that would haunt this mystery for generations. If it had been an avalanche, why were the bodies found spread out over such a large area, and why were some fully clothed while others were nearly naked? Why did some have catastrophic internal injuries, while others appeared to have simply collapsed in the snow? If the cold had killed them, why had they cut their way out of the tent and fled into the wilderness, abandoning their survival instincts? And then there was the radiation. Was it connected to the strange lights in the sky, the glowing orbs that witnesses in nearby villages had reported that night? Was the group caught in the aftermath of a secret weapons test, their bodies suffering the effects of an unknown energy force? Some believe the hikers stumbled upon something they were never meant to see, a military experiment gone wrong, an exposure to something beyond human understanding. Others suggest they were victims of an unknown predator, something that lived in the mountains, something that had stalked them, waited until the Ural Mountains still stand, silent and cold, keeping their secrets buried beneath the snow. The Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of history's most unsettling mysteries, one that may never be fully explained. But what do you think? Was it simply nature's cruel hand, or something far more sinister lurking in the dark? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the unknown, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps us keep exploring the darkest corners of history. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next mystery might be even more chilling. Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. What theory do you believe? Was it an avalanche, a military cover-up, or something even stranger? We'll be watching.